Good evening, councillors, staff and members of the public. Welcome to the City's Public Agenda Briefing Forum. My name is Councillor Lisa Cooper and I will be chairing this forum. We wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on, the Whadjuk of the Noongar people. We wish to acknowledge their elders past, present and future and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to the life of this city and this region. The operation of this forum is in accordance with the City's adopted public agenda briefing policy and procedure and is governed by the provisions of the Local Government Act, Standing Orders and Rules of Conduct. This agenda briefing forum will provide the opportunity for elected members to be informed and seek additional information on matters prior to the presentation of these items to the next ordinary meeting of Council for consideration and decision. This meeting is also live streamed and I would like to welcome those watching remotely. I thank you for your interest. So, declarations of interest.
Apologies.
Apologies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have got 3 apologies tonight. One from Councillor Leslie Boyd, from Councillor Mary Cannon and from Councillor Brooke O'Donnell.
Declarations of interest.
Through the Chair, I have received one declaration of interest from Councillor Billich in relation to item 10.2.3 on page 44, the submission to the 22-23 Metropolitan Regional Roads Group improvement projects, declaring a direct financial interest, as I have a financial interest in 2 properties on Kalamunda Road. Thank you.
Okay, and announcements by the member presiding without discussion.
I don't think you have any announcements, do you? No.
All right, so public question time and public statement time. We'll be doing those with our presentations, unless anyone has anything that they would like to say now. All right, public submissions received in writing.
Through the Chair, no submissions or petitions, thank you.
Okay, petitions received?
No petitions.
Okay, confidential items announced but not discussed.
Yeah, there is one confidential item, so Council will discuss that at the closure of this meeting.
So reports to Council. So we have item 10.1.1, Draft Local Planning Policy 31, Container Deposit Scheme Infrastructure for final adoption. We will be having a presentation by Andrew Fowler-Tart, our Manager of Approval Services.
Good evening, councillors, members of the public. We've got 2 items to present on tonight, both planning policies. The first, as indicated, is item 10.1.1, which is Draft Local Planning Policy 31, Container Deposit Scheme Infrastructure for final adoption. So the purpose of this report is for Council to consider Draft Local Planning Policy 31, Container Deposit Scheme Infrastructure for adoption without the need for any public advertising. Importantly, the LPP has been modelled on a position statement that's been put out by the state government back in May 2019, and that position statement essentially provides a template for how a local planning policy should be based for this particular item. So the aim of the policy is to provide an exemption in accordance with the 2015 regulations from the requirement to obtain planning approval or development approval for container deposit schemes, which satisfy minimum development standards. The state government is implementing a container deposit scheme to complement existing curbside recycling services. The CDS provides a refund to be provided for any person who returns an eligible beverage container through the CDS. Containers are returned through various container points. This policy aims to provide an exemption for these containers where they satisfy minimum development standards, and the exemption is from requiring development approval. Namely, these pertain to a reverse vending machine and container collection cages. Now, the development standards can apply to things like visual amenity, operational amenity, and the building footprint. So where they can satisfy this criteria, they are therefore exempt from requiring a planning approval for those two items. There are, however, exemptions that don't apply, and these pertain to larger sort of container deposit recycling centres and large-scale recycling facilities. The pictures there don't show actually reverse vending machines. So the recommendation is before you there, that the proposed local planning policy 31 as outlined in attachment 1 pursuant to schedule 2 part 2 clause 5.2 of the planning and development local planning scheme 2015 be adopted without the requirement for formal advertising. Any questions? Right, I shall move on to the next item, which is item 10.1.2.
Sorry, Manager, we do have a question from Mr. Forrest by the look of things. Are you indicating you want to speak to this?
Oh, you've got one there?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, no problem.
And you speak up anyway. Presiding member, councillors and members of the public, I'd like to ask Andrew, is there any way of segregating different types of same plastic containers? I have a problem that I collect about 30, about every fortnight, plastic containers which are the same kind of plastic as those which are in the container deposit scheme, but all I can do is squash them and put them in the yellow top bin, which is a real pity. And I think there was talk some time ago about a 3-bin system. The first question is there any way of segregating those out rather than just squashing them and putting them in the yellow top bin? And secondly, with regard to the 3-bin system.
In terms of the first question, I'm not aware of that, but I'm happy to take that on notice. And get some further
Andrew,
information.
can I refer that to Mr. Jackson, please?
Yes.
He will be able to take those
Thank
questions.
you, Mr. Forrest, and through the chair. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate you for putting recyclable containers in the recycling bin, because they ultimately end up recycled in the same manner as containers from the container deposit scheme. They both go to the same process. So it doesn't matter if it goes to a CDS plant or in your yellow top, it's still dealt with in a recycling sense the same way. So good on you in that regard. In terms of where the city is with the 3-bin system, once, as we have reported to council, we have an adopted waste plan, which will go towards implementing a 3-bin system, the 3rd bin being food organics and garden organics, once the city is advised of the relevant costs of the FOGO processing plant. That tender process is progressing through the EMRC at the present time. So once we've got some more information to impart to the council and to the public, we shall do so.
Thank you.
Sorry, my bad. Council may recall back in November 2019 the policy was adopted on the basis it would be reviewed within a 12-month period. The policy is brought back on that basis. I think it's important to note that in that 12-month period it's given the city an opportunity to review the policy in terms of its operation, and a lot of the proposed changes we've put forward are a result of that period. So essentially the focus of the review was as follows: to reiterating the intent of the policy is to facilitate the provision of public art where a development generates a planning need for it, ensuring that the policy facilitates public art which has a planning nexus to the development which triggers the planning need for it, and also acknowledging that there are some circumstances where requiring public art or a contribution as part of a development application may not need the necessary planning test, which is an important note. Now, the application of the policy to date has met some resistance from the development industry, and consequently we've had a number of SAT reviews in regard to conditions applied, and essentially those SAT reviews have looked at it in terms of the validity of the provisions with respect to the policy. So therefore the principal aim of the review was to redraft a policy which has a valid planning purpose and achieves its planning objectives, and importantly removing arbitrary provisions which have no planning need and nexus. So the recommendation is that Council adopt the proposed local planning policy 26 for the purposes of public advertising for a period of 21 days pursuant to Schedule 2, Part 2, Clause 4.1 of the Planning and Development Local Planning Scheme Regulations 2015. Just want to note, as part of the review of this policy, we did consult with the Kalamunda Arts Advisory Committee and gave them the opportunity to have some initial input into those changes that we put forward. Any questions?
Councillor G10.
Thank you, Chair. We're getting a bit of pushback, obviously, from some of these developers. How do we fare across the board with other local authorities? Have we had some feedback from them, how they deal with this, with some of these issues, and how does our policy stack up with theirs, against theirs?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. Look, in preparing the initial policy, we did look at what other local authorities were doing in the space of public art. So some of the provisions were drafted in response to that. We also received some feedback from the Kalamunda Arts Advisory Committee. The fact that we are getting some pushback from developers tells us that the current policy does need some modification to make sure it is has true planning intent and purpose. So I think the changes will hopefully will achieve that, particularly when we get challenged through the State Administrative Tribunal. So I'm not sure exactly to what extent other local authorities are having their provisions challenged. Certainly the changes we put forward we believe are right and appropriate in the context of some of the feedback we've had from developers. So we've really moved forward on that basis, Councillor.
Just a follow-up question. Is it possible for us to have some feedback of what other local authorities do and what they...
Can I refer to Director? I think you probably have some more details about our policy in comparison to what kind of standard clauses other local governments have.
Through the Chair, happy to pull the analysis that we undertook as part of the initial adoption of this local planning policy. It's comprehensively outlined within the body of that report. So happy to reference that. But the city's thresholds in terms of when public art is triggered is probably the lowest in the metropolitan area, particularly at 500,000. There's also the percentage, which is at 1%, which is fairly standard amongst other local governments. Whether it applies to industrial areas or residential development and the like varies across the metropolitan area. There's no consistency in that regard. So each local government has different provisions depending on the nature of developments and the makeup of land uses within their local government area. Our policy in particular sticks out with regards to the threshold which public art is required at 500,000, but most other provisions are generally consistent with other metropolitan local governments.
Thank you.
Make one final point. The actual threshold of 500,000 isn't changing under the proposed modification, so we're keeping it at the 500,000.
Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Saul?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I note that there was consultation with the Kalamunda Arts Advisory Committee. I'm just wanting to know what the result was of that consultation, please.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. The feedback initially was they had no real issue with the proposed changes, and they certainly didn't raise any matters of concern to us. They will have a further opportunity when this goes through the more formal advertising process to comment, and there may be other comments they want to provide through that period.
Any more questions? Councillor Ritchie?
Thank you, Andrew. Pardon me. The appeals that we've had to SAT, just wondering if we get an update on where they are. And secondly, and I know SAT's confidential, but whether in fact they were something close to the 500,000 or whether in fact they were ones that would have kicked in at a higher amount.
Thank you for the question. Through the chair, all those applications that were a matter of SAT review were amounts well in excess of $1 million. I can't really divulge the discussions we're having at the moment. Suffice to say, though, we are going through the mediation process, but beyond that, I can't really comment further.
Director? Yeah.
Through the chair, just in response to Councillor Saul's query, paragraphs 21 and 22 of the officer report outline some of the feedback provided from the Arts Advisory Committee, and paragraph 22 actually provides some feedback that was received from the Economic Development Advisory Committee as well. There was engagement with that for completeness.
Councillor Saul?
That was noted. Thank you, Director. I just, because it was raised in the public agenda briefing, I wanted the officer to speak to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Right, we're going to move on now to item 10.1.3, outcome of Wattle Grove Cell 9 CCTV Feasibility Study and the Community Safety and Crime Prevention Advisory Committee recommendations. This will be presented by Pete Varellas, Director, Development Services.
Evening, councillors, those in attendance and staff. This evening I'll present on the outcome of the Wattle Grove Cell 9 CCTV Feasibility Study and the Community Safety and Crime Prevention Advisory Committee recommendations as a result of that analysis. It's an overview of a feasibility study that was undertaken for the Cell 9 area in relation to the potential to install CCTV. Funding for the report was included in the 2020-21 budget at a cost of approximately $7,500. The feasibility study was presented to the Community Safety and Crime Prevention Advisory Committee, referred to as CESPAC internally, on the 10th of February 2021. The study investigated not just CCTV but some safety measures with regards to Wattle Grove Cell 9 more generally, but it did look at traditional CCTV, number plate recognition CCTV, a CCTV subsidy scheme, the potential for a security patrol service, physical measures to improve safety within the area, and also looking at closed circuit television on the Ranger fleet and variable messaging boards. The CESPAC resolved to form a subcommittee to further address and discuss the security measures within the report. CESPAC also requested additional information and cost estimates around installing CCTV on community safety vehicles. I'll go through each of the elements that were investigated and the outcomes with a preliminary review on those as well. So a review into the placement of traditional CCTV assets was not considered a viable option as part of the assessment. The reasons being is that there's insufficient value when addressing a cost-benefit analysis of standard and traditional CCTV cameras, minimal return on a significant investment, high ongoing maintenance costs, limited potential for criminal evidence value, higher city and police resourcing costs to manage, obtain footage and check and maintain the system, and the vast majority of movement is vehicular. So the preliminary review was that the City agrees with the consultant that the placement of traditional CCTV within Wattle Grove Cell 9 is not a cost-effective or viable solution to reduce crime within the area, and therefore recommends that it's not considered further. Number plate recognition CCTV was also analysed. ANPR is considered a feasible option from a crime prevention perspective. WA Police may consider these sites suitable for the ANPR system based on the number of vehicle movements and the light that go through there. There is a high upfront cost if you install the cameras required by the WA Police. They're approximately $20,000 per camera. The preliminary review is that this technology is exciting, however significantly benefits the police and state government and is not a core function of the local authority. It is therefore recommended that the ANPR camera system be considered for future grant funding opportunities rather than being funded directly by the city through municipal funds. The study also looked at a CCTV subsidy scheme. These schemes assist private residences, businesses and community groups to install CCTV on their premises to address crime and safety through visual surveillance. Local governments that are providing schemes include the town of Victoria Park, Cambridge and the city of Karratha. The town of Victoria Park provide a total funding package of about $150,000 and provide a rebate of half the cost of up to $750 per CCTV project. In 2017-18, the town provided approximately $80,000 in rebate funding to the community, and in 19-20, approximately $66,000. There's generally some criteria that's associated with applying for the subsidy, and that is that your CCTV network is registered with the state's CCTV strategy, so that the police are aware that those properties have CCTV, and should crime or an event occur in proximity of that address, they're aware that there may be footage that may assist with the investigation. Cambridge and Karratha offer a similar subsidy scheme with rebates up to a maximum of $500 per application. The preliminary review is that it's recommended that any possible scheme be funded through a grant from either the state or federal government as opposed to municipal funding. Security patrols were also analysed. The recently adopted Community Safety and Crime Prevention Plan to 2020 to 2025 has an action to actually investigate this and report the possibility and financial impact of introducing such a service. A review of neighbouring councils found that the cities of Belmont and Canning have a 24/7 patrol service. City of Swan has a security service specifically for an estate in the Vines. The Shire of Mundaring and City of Gosnells do not have a security patrol service. Some initial cost estimates as part of the report suggest approximately $400,000 to $450,000 per patrol vehicle annually. However, some preliminary cost estimates obtained by two private contractors used by Belmont and Swan indicate a cost of approximately $520,000. This is based on a 24-hour service. Should an after-hours service be provided, that's a service outside of the hours of the city's community safety services, there would obviously be a reduced cost. If a levy similar to the City of Canning was applied to the City of Kalamunda, that's a levy on rate charges, specifically for security services, it would raise approximately $1.34 million annually. Preliminary review is that following a review of the other local governments, a security service may be of benefit to the city and complement the existing community safety services that are being provided. It's recommended that CESPAC continue to investigate and discuss the feasibility of introducing a patrol service within the city of Kalamunda and report that to council. Some matters that may also be of consideration as part of that process would be extensive and targeted community engagement on the prospect. However, there's still a fair bit of work to be done on this potential security service through the Crime Prevention Committee, with discussions around community engagement and costs, and those will be reported back to council in good time. Another measure that was looked at was that there's surrounding infrastructure of state significance that borders the Cell 9 area, primarily being the Tonkin Highway, Roe Highway and the ARC infrastructure rail. Those infrastructure corridors do provide access for unregistered vehicles and the like into the area. And when compared to other parts of the city and similar infrastructure, there's not as much fencing and barriers in place within Cell 9 as there are in other urbanised parts of the city adjacent to the same infrastructure. So preliminary review is to advocate to those infrastructure providers to improve security measures along their transport corridors adjacent to Cell 9, providing examples in other parts of the city in urbanised environments where there are appropriate fencing and bollards and barriers in place, and to advocate to main roads as well. As part of the consideration of the feasibility study, the Community Safety and Crime Prevention Committee posed the idea of installing CCTV to the community safety fleet of vehicles and variable messaging boards. And that came about through the discussion. It was investigated by the city, and a subcommittee was formed to look at this further, and also the other recommendations within the feasibility study. There's a summary of the makeup of CCTV that may be installed on the vehicles, and that provides 360-degree view, is communicated through the 4G remote connection, internet connections, and provides footage as those vehicles patrol and variable messaging boards are placed throughout the city. The preliminary review is that the fit out of the vehicles and variable messaging boards would expand the city's CCTV network and enhance the Eyes on the Street campaign. CESPAC endorsed the fit out of the vehicles and trailers with CCTV for recommendation to council for consideration as part of the budgeting process. The estimates for the makeup of CCTV outlined on the screen is around $75,000 for the city's fleet of community safety vehicles and variable messaging boards. However, the preliminary review is that at this stage, it's recommended that that recommendation be deferred to future budget considerations beyond 21-22, as at this current stage in the budgeting process, it's not something that is able to be considered on balance and having regard for other priorities that the city is working through. So CESPAC recommended that council endorse the fitting out of the vehicles and list the $75,000 capital expenditure item for 21-22, along with noting the findings of the report and endorsing its recommendations for future budget considerations and deliberations and for possible grant funding opportunities. The officer and the city's recommendation to council is in part 1 and 2 the same as CESPAC, to note and endorse. However, parts 3 and 4 are different, and that is to note the request for fitting out of the vehicles and variable messaging boards and defer consideration to future budgeting processes beyond 21-22. Any questions?
Councillor Saul.
In relation to City of Swan and the Vines specifically having the additional security patrols, was there a special area rate for that to occur?
Through the chair, it is my understanding that there is a special area rate specifically for that estate for the security patrol service.
And just a follow-up question, do the crime rates within the City of Kalamunda justify this level of investment? Are the crime rates comparatively to the other cities and councils that were raised? How do they compare?
Through the chair, looking at the city's locales specifically, Wattle Grove didn't have the higher crime rates out of our localities. Other suburbs like Forestfield did have higher crime rates and may justify CCTV expansion within those areas. And the city's CCTV strategy seeks to install CCTV in those what we call hotspot locations. We've sought grant funding opportunities recently, but unfortunately we're not successful. But those sites that have been identified through the CCTV strategy and were the subject of previous grant funding applications are still scheduled to be progressed as further grant funding opportunities arise. But you will note within the report and within the attachment of the feasibility study that Wattle Grove didn't have crime statistics that warranted such an investment.
Any further questions? No. can I just ask one question? In regard to the community safety fleet vehicles and your VMS units, so just out of curiosity, how many hours a day would they be out on the road? And would there be times when they're in fact not in the road but perhaps parked up because doing administrative duties and things like that? Thank you.
Through the chair, thank you for your question, Councillor Cooper. Good question. The city does operate its community safety team and ranger services on a rostered basis. So there are times where the rangers are out undertaking routine patrols, but depending on the nature of issues that have arisen during that week or during that month, there may be investigative work that is required within the office. We do encourage our rangers to be out and about and eyes on the street and undertaking duties within the community as much as possible. But things such as serious dog attacks and the like do require investigation and administrative work. And much like the West Australian Police, they are out on duty and undertaking their patrols at time, and they're also in the office undertaking administrative work and fulfilling those other functions as well. I couldn't give you an exact breakdown of how much time. It's really dependent on the nature of work that's before them at that point in time.
And through the chair also, the hours are just during daylight hours. Our rangers finish at 7 each night.
Provide a 7 till 7 service Monday to Friday and a 7 till 4 p.m. service on weekends and public holidays.
Is there any further questions? Nope. Okay, we're going to move on now to item 10.2.1, Kalamunda Performing Arts Centre Asset Management Plan 2021. And the presentation is by Douglas Bartlett, Manager Asset Planning.
Good evening, councillors, staff and members of the public. This will be the first of an asset management plan focusing specifically on facilities in the city. We have two more coming to council in June. The purpose is to seek endorsement of this asset management plan for the Kalamunda Performing Arts Centre, it being an assessment of the building asset and the funding forecast for the management of those assets over the long term. The former picture was the main apologies. The Arts Centre and then the Ag Hall in this slide. So the Arts Centre consists of the Agricultural Hall built in 1896 and the Performing Arts Centre built in 1996. And this asset management plan was prepared as requested through the corporate business plan. The asset management plan follows a similar format to the city's major asset class asset management plans and was informed by a range of different data sources, including detailed building condition inspections, an asset valuation of the city's building and land assets in June 2020, an accessibility audit, and then a facility suitability assessment in December, which helped inform the theatre seating and some other matters. This AMP is an asset and component focused plan and does not cover operational matters. The gross replacement cost of the facility is $8 million, so and that is if we were in theory to lose the whole building and have to replace it in full. And in the books it carries $171,000 of annual depreciation. We've identified on average a renewal funding need of $120,000 per year over the 15 years, although that is concentrated in the current planning around the next 5 years with a significant number of high cost items identified for renewal for various reasons, including upgrades. So in terms of upgrades, there's quite a range of items listed in the plan. We're looking at LED lighting within the main theatre, the seating, the improvements to the rear car park, and so on. And then we also have an accessibility improvement, a large range of items identified through an accessibility audit. All of the projects will be subject to priority testing against the larger capital works program, so the timing is indicative and will be confirmed as each year progresses and we get confirmation around the functional need of each of these things. These are some example pictures of the areas picked up. The top left picture represents the guttering and the painting work that would be needed on the exterior. The landing platform there is very old and doesn't have a load rating to it, so it would need to be replaced with a suitably designed structure. On the right is the electrical switchboard. Emergency services board. We have the lower toilets needing an upgrade in the next few years, and then also on the bottom left, change rooms. In the program of West 21-22, this list is amended slightly from the plan because only last week we had some confirmation of the timing of certain projects in the Capital Works program. So we currently have asbestos replacement, so all asbestos containing materials are to be replaced as part of a program of $40,000 worth across the facility. Then in 22-23, we moved to a range of other projects with the circles representing generally where those things are located. In 23-24, and another range of projects, and to reiterate that the actual priority for these will be reviewed as each year progresses so that we can spread the expense appropriately across the years. And then in 24-25, more work proceeding. And 25-26. And so that represents the 5 years of, I guess, the high intensity level of renewals and upgrades that have been identified, again, all subject to funding requests. So the recommendation is that Council endorse the Kalamunda Performing Arts Centre Asset Management Plan 2021 and note the proposed funding levels will be included in the annual budget process and Capital Works program. And are there any questions to that?
Councillor Ritchie.
Thanks, Doug. A couple of things. Can we be assured that the Education Department is being billed annually for their contribution? Because I do know that for 15 years we didn't bill them. Now, I think that has been rectified. Just clarify that we are sending them an annual bill.
That's correct, Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you. And secondly, given the nature of some of the major upgrades that we're looking at, I mean, I know it's mainly maintenance, have we approached the Education Department, or would we consider approaching the department, given that it is a main teaching area for the school, whether they might at least entertain the notion of putting some money in, because the money they put in is fundamentally operational, cleaning, etc. But I wonder whether they may consider, given the building's 25 plus years old, whether they may consider some contribution.
Thank you. Through the Chair, we haven't specifically looked at that question, but that would be a consideration.
Yes, quick question on, you mentioned the rear car park area. Is that the gravel car park area?
Yeah, the area to the north of the building, the west of the building, that sort of falls away. It's used for the markets. I'm not sure of the frequency, but the idea would be to formalise that and provide better parking facility and parking arrangement for the vehicles.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Thomas.
You mentioned asbestos, and I think it was 40,000, which doesn't seem very much. Where is the asbestos, and is it a safety issue?
Apologies, Council, I don't have that detail to hand. I can provide that later on. As far as a safety issue, we're taking an approach that we're attempting to remove all asbestos-containing materials in all buildings over the next few years as part of an ongoing program.
Thank you.
Any further questions? No. Okay, so we're going to move on now to item 10.2.2, Kalamunda Town Centre speed limits. And again, we have Douglas Bartlett doing our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you again, councillors, staff and members of the public. This is to determine the preferred speed limits within the Kalamunda Town Centre and authorise an application to Main Roads Western Australia for approval, and follows a community consultation on the subject. In November 2019, the Council endorsed a CESPAC Community Safety and Crime Prevention Advisory Committee request relating to a number of speed limit zone areas, and the City subsequently undertook those investigations, including some other areas that arose through the years. This particular area took some time because we were awaiting the Main Roads process as to how to deal with what we call a movement in place submission. but consequently we were able to then make that submission. So just to repeat what has probably been mentioned many times with council, that Main Roads WA is the sole authority for speed limits in Western Australia, and so they must their approval must be achieved to change a speed limit, and they would then provide the signs accordingly. So the town centre, in terms of changing the speed limit, has what we call movement and place characteristics, and officers would feel would be highly supportive of a 40 km/h speed zone through the town, which is indicated in attachment 1, and that would pick up all of the streets within that sort of block, including Canning Road. And we submitted an application on that basis. Main Roads, however, did not agree, and so only provided an interim approval for Haynes Street, Central Lane, Barber Street and Railway Road to reduce to 40 km/h. With that application, we asked them to hold the approval per se until we had time to do community consultation and seek direction from council. This is approximately the area represented. The attachment provides that detail of exactly where the start and end of the 40 km/h zone would have occurred. So the city undertook community consultation and received a significant number of responses and surveys. I'm not going to go into great detail about those responses. The key question we're asking, we sought feedback on, was whether or not the community was in supportive of a 40 km/h speed limit. The graph is self-explaining. The majority of people definitely do not. We then undertook some other reviews, looked at some age brackets and some other factors, and determined that it appeared to be a common theme that in the majority people don't desire to have that type of speed limit. However, given that the operating speeds for Haynes Street, Barber and Railway are already below or near 40 km/h, and they've been approved already at 40 km/h, it would appear that we can recommend to proceed with those streets. And as a side note, your council will be aware of Central Mall and the intention to have a much lower speed limit there as part of a shared space. And the city is also releasing road safety awareness program through its social media and through some events that will be happening in the next 6 to 12 months. The recommendation then is council note the community engagement report, endorse the application to be made to Main Roads for just Haynes Street, Railway Road from Mead to Stirk and Barber Street. Note that Central Mall Design will be seeking for that 10 km/h posted speed limit, and that the remaining streets within the town centre will be seeking to address them in the future as upgrades are undertaken with the major town centre work. Any questions?
So, Mr. Forrest, do you have a question? Would you like to come up, please? Thank you.
Presiding member, councillors and members of the gallery. Probably like councillors, I'm still wading through this mass of responses, and I think they're quite revealing. And I ask, surely it was predictable that users of Canning Road would object to lowering the speed limit, since the majority use it as a route to somewhere else, not to visit the town centre of Kalamunda. Furthermore, I think a lot of them, you would probably agree, have in mind fines, because sometimes you can go through Canning Road quite quickly, and other times you can't because it's very congested. So some people would be thinking, I don't want to get caught fined. So that's one point. And my second question is, why was there seen to be a need to only seek responses to lowering speed limits, rather than combining that with the user needs for safe walkability access into the town centre? It seems almost predictable that you would get a kind of answers you've got. But that key issue, and councillors will probably remember, a petition I brought forward from 230 ratepayers a year ago requesting safe walkability into the town centre. And I would have thought that that would have been included rather than just talking about bald speed limits. The conclusion seemed to be that to wait yet longer for someone to produce streetscape master plans based on the original activity centre plan, which we all have different opinions about. For instance, I would suggest is totally out of date in one part, that's Barber Street, because we now have, we've had banks closing, of course, several of them closed, but Barber Street has the post office, and the post office is now a multiple bank. That's what the scrap was about, the lady who gave those watches away. It was about involving lots of banks with the post office. Now, what we've got there now is a huge parking problem and access problem. Now, so that would have to be taken into consideration into looking at, you can't just look at the streetscape master plan that was part of the activity centre. We've got to look at it updated, which is now very different. I'd also point out that at that time when that activity centre was being discussed, I wrote to the Minister, and I think I mentioned this before, seeking a combined portfolio response from Main Roads and Planning, both of whom are under the same Minister, and was given one. And in that, the Minister's representative, on her authority, suggested a signed crossing at the junction of Mead Street and Canning. It was a suggestion made by the Minister, in effect, the Minister for Planning and Main Roads. So I just draw attention to that being another issue.
Thank you, Mr. Forrest. Does anyone have any further questions, or who would be best to answer?
Would you like to?
Thank you, Mr. Forrest. You've raised some interesting questions. The question you raised is why didn't it include other aspects of consideration, including safe walking? This report was in direct response to a requirement of the council from investigating 40-kilometre speed zones. So this report is speaking to that. We have talked long and arduous times and many occasions about safe walking access to the Kalamunda town centre. They require works to do what you're trying to achieve. To do the works, we need streetscapes. So the fact is the streetscape master plans would develop and deliver upon better pedestrian facilities, noting that we are progressing a signalised crossing at Canning Road near the new old IGA. The question of Canning Road being self-explanatory, that people would object to a 40k zone, yes, that's a fair point, but you would note in the attachment to the report that we list the specific streets and get individual responses to the specific streets within the target area, and by and large, there's still an objection, by and large, to every street in toto. So whilst your comment on Canning Road is correct, but the community have also given us their feedback on the other streets.
Have we got any further questions? Okay, we're going to now move on to item 10.2.3, submission for the 2022-23 Metropolitan Regional Roads Group Road Improvement Projects Program.
Through the chair, if I may, we've got a declaration on this one from Councillor Billich, and it's a direct financial, so Councillor Billich will need to leave the room. If we could just wait for Councillor Billich to leave, please.
Thank you. And this will be presented by Doug Bartlett, Manager Asset.
Thank you again, and Council. Apologies, our slides are slightly out of order, and the numbering should read 10.2.3 on the slide there. This is the purpose of this report is to seek endorsement of a submission for funding under the 22 and 23 financial year for the Metropolitan Regional Roads Group Road Improvement Projects Program. I think it was last month we asked Council to look at the rehabilitation funding program, and this is a parallel but slightly different funding scheme. The proposed project that we are submitting funding for is to upgrade Kalamunda Road from the west of Roe Highway through to the east side of Cyril Road, so not including the Cyril Road intersection, and it includes the Hawkvale intersection, which we're referring to as the Kalamunda Hawkvale Road Upgrade Project. This is the first year the City will be submitting funding under this program, and like its partner program for road rehabilitation, the State provides 2/3 funding for eligible projects. The project was identified through the City's, the Kalamunda Road Functional Review and Upgrade Plan, which we presented to Council in August 2020. Was endorsed. The diagram in the slide shows the subject area of this project, which the red light won't show on the screen. The right end of the scope would join the current Roe Kalamunda interchange project. Includes the concept there for the roundabout at Hawkvale and then through to the west, but not including the Cyril Road roundabout, although that is in this particular diagram. This diagram was taken from that plan, and so it doesn't reflect the actual submission scope. The key change that councillors will be aware of, and residents there, a number of them have provided feedback during that planning process, was that there is proposed connection of Range Court through to Hawkvale to make a full intersection there, and then a closure of Rangeview Road onto Kalamunda Road. That is conceptual, and so the objective for the City will be to undertake further detailed design and consultation on that and make sure we address any concerns. So the submissions have been completed by the City and provided on a worksheet provided by Main Roads WA. They have a range of criteria, including vehicle operating costs, vehicle emissions and intangible benefits, resulting in a score out of 50. We have evaluated a score of 6.16, which is higher than a number of other qualifying projects in the current year that other local governments have submitted. So we're reasonably confident that this would achieve funding under this program. If it was successful, the City would need to fund $513,000 plus overheads in the 22-23 construction year. As mentioned, we have funding allocated in 21-22, subject to budget approval for the design and public consultation to make sure we can address those local access concerns as that road network changes. Due to the due date being 21st of May, we will need to submit that before OCM. However, as always, any such submission can be withdrawn if Council choose not to proceed. The recommendation is that Council endorses the submission for this project, noting that our recommendation refers to attachment 1. However, we haven't attached the submission. I can provide it to councillors on request. It is quite complex and analytical, so it's not a written report as such. Any questions?
Could someone ask Councillor Village to...
Okay, so we're moving on now to item 10.2.4, submission for the Clean Energy Futures Fund, Light Emitting Diode, LED, Street Lighting Project. And once again, we have Doug Bartlett.
Thank you. So the last report I have the pleasure to present to you tonight, councillors, staff and members of the public, is a submission for funding for LED street lighting upgrades. The purpose is to endorse the seeking of grant funding from the CEFF scheme, as referred to it in abbreviations. The image on the screen at the moment is the common type of LED light that would be provided through this scheme, as this is a Western Power street lighting provision. So although just for clarification, the fund itself is provided through the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation. However, Western Power own the streetlights, and so we then need to arrange through them to actually have the upgrades done. So they own and manage approximately 6,800 streetlights in the city, and with less than 2% being currently being LEDs. The normal replacement of failed light lamps by Western Power would not trigger a need for LED replacement until the full pole needs replacing, or their existing stock is non-existing LED stock is used up. And so there are some criteria around the submission of application under this funding scheme, which includes having a project between the 1 to 4 million funding bracket. As such, we can't go for a smaller scale project. So as an update, the city has already commenced work on the stage 1 of our LED upgrades. We have proceeded with Western Power to shortlist the streets and the lights that would be upgraded under that program. We've selected the distributor A roads as being the higher priority order roads in the city that we manage with the highest traffic volumes. And something like 650 lights, the exact number will be confirmed in the next couple of months, will then be upgraded with funds provided through the current financial year budget. This submission would deal with what we might call stages 2 to 4, or the next lot of upgrades over 3 years, covering 1,600 lights with a total cost of 1.63 million, where the city would need to fund 3/4 of that. So this fund only provides 25% funding. Western Power have a process now. It took some time to get clarification on this, but they will manage the design and installation, so it makes the project actually fairly straightforward for the city to deliver. We just support them through the funding of the upgrades. And there are a range of benefits which can be found on the Western Power website around upgrading to LED street lights, including reduced energy consumption. We receive a reduced tariff that we pay for the lighting. There are reduced life cycle costs which are then reflected in that tariff, and there are also reductions in emissions associated with the reduced energy consumption and the materials used in the lighting. This map represents the streets that we're targeting. The red lines are the ones under our stage 1 that we're currently progressing with Western Power, and all of the blue ones are the ones identified for this series of stages over the 3 years. The plan, I should note, has been updated since the attachment to the report, just to show more clearly what the difference in the 2 stages were. So once all those lights are upgraded, we would experience a saving in the order of $144,000 per year in operating costs. That's through that reduced tariff, and emission reductions of 192 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. And that provides a positive net present value, in other words, a positive representing a saving over the 20-year life of the lights. And we'll be specifying smart controls, which supports the city's future smart cities strategy, and a range of devices can then be applied to those streetlights. The grant has already been submitted as they were due on the 22nd of April, and as always, the grant can be withdrawn if the council choose not to proceed. The recommendation is the council endorse the City of Kalamunda submission for light emitting diode LED street lighting upgrades for the 2021 Clean Energy Future Fund. Any questions?
Councillor Ritchie.
Thanks, Doug. I notice we've got the 650 which are being done currently, and this application is for another, can't see the figure off the top of it, there it is. Yeah, is that it? Do we have any, I know we'd roll out further, but have we got any currently? Is that where we are at the moment?
Thank you. Through the chair, I'll field that question. Basically, as each new residential or industrial subdivision comes online, the new requirements of the city are that they become LED streetlights. So it's as the new estates get developed, they become LED and add to the stock. Then there is the odd replacement as a fitting is completely destroyed through accidents or whatever, that Western Power would replace it with an LED. So as we've said in the report, about 2% of our 6,800 lamps at the moment are LED. We've got a long ways to go.
Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to clarify, so obviously there's less maintenance, they last longer, and they're 30% more efficient. What's the replacement cost of the units versus the standard globe and light and fitting?
We don't have that information. That's a Western Power costing information. We only have an estimate from them to the cost to upgrade the light, which was, from memory, around $560 a unit.
Okay,
Sorry, if I could clarify, through the chair, I could also clarify, Western Power aren't providing old technology new lights anymore. New luminaires. Everything going forward from them now is LED.
Okay, so that kind of answers my next question. So if a unit fails, they'll replace like for like or better?
That's correct. If, as you can imagine, a light fitting has its luminaire, John, you can chip in here, and the lamp. So basically, if the lamp fails, Western Power will replace it with an existing lamp from their warehouse till those warehouse runs out of lamps. If the fitting itself is destroyed, they'll replace the whole lot with a new LED fitting.
Just on the funding then, so I'm just, the way I read it is that there's a shortfall of 800,000 over 3 years. Is that, the city's going to put in 1.2, is that correct?
Paragraph 14 in the report, apologies, we have the municipal funding numbers there need to be updated. The total budget or total project cost are estimated to be 1.63 million, and the city would be needing to fund the 1.2 million of that.
Okay, so if the city's funding 1.2 over 3 years, and the saving of around 140 grand for electricity costs, there still leaves a shortfall of 800,000. Is there a plan for finding that? Is that loan funding or?
Thank you, through the chair. But yes, you talked about there's 3 years of investment and there's 20 years of reduced tariffs of $144,000 savings.
Yeah, okay.
So it's as we've outlined in the financial considerations, paragraph 29 is suggestions of how we fund the 3 years of funding, but the tariff savings apply from immediate changeover.
Okay.
And they are ongoing for the 20 years.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
Okay. Any more questions? No. Okay. Thank you, Doug. We will now move on to item 10.2.5, City of Kalamunda Climate Change Declaration. Presentation by Brett Jackson, Director, Asset Services.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors and community members who I could probably recognise by name here at the moment. I'd also like to recognise Mark Schilling and Peter Forrest, who are members of the Kalamunda Environmental Advisory Committee, who were fundamental to this report. So, why am I going backwards? I don't know. Stop. Donna, can you? Thank you. Thank you for the technical confusion from your technical director. This report is detailing recommendations from the Kalamunda Environmental Advisory Committee, who we shall call CEAC, regarding a declaration of climate change emergency and allied issues. It is recommended that the Council endorse these recommendations. In March 2020, in response to a motion raised at the annual electors meeting, Council set CEAC a task to provide advice regarding the subject of climate change and the city's support or otherwise for some WALGA initiatives in this space, WALGA being the Western Australian Local Government Authority. Unfortunately, during the early phases of our COVID-19 emergency, CEAC were unable to meet to address these issues, and once we were able to reconvene, they reached a consensus recommendation after their investigations in April 2021. CEAC have reported back to the City on the task set by Council, which is attachment 4 to this report. In detail, CEAC and the administration concur that climate change is real and is impacting our community. And some of the impacts that CEAC noted, the extreme weather events, drying climate, has an impact on water supply and vegetation in our district. The overall increase in average temperatures are adversely affecting the very young and the elderly, of which our community is highly represented compared to other districts. WALGA developed a climate change declaration and a climate change policy and was seeking endorsement by member councils of WALGA. At this point in time, 32% of WALGA member councils have signed this declaration and policy, but it covers 77% of the population in Western Australia. CEAC have also recommended to Council that we declare a climate emergency. Now, to make that declaration meaningful, it is recommended that investigations be undertaken. That WALGA have completed and prepared a climate emergency declaration pack, and that we recommend that we take that away and provide some detail for further consideration for Council, rather than just simply say we declare a climate emergency. We put some teeth to the declaration. So the 6-part recommendation. We will receive the report from our Environmental Advisory Committee. We authorise the Mayor to sign on behalf of the City the WALGA Local Government Declaration on Climate Change. Endorse that the City advises WALGA of its support for their policy statement. We seek from the CEO, which means the staff and the administration, a set of actions proposed to address climate change within the next revision of the corporate business plan. We declare that there is a climate emergency and receive a subsequent report addressing the climate emergency declaration aligned to the WALGA template by the end of next year to allow us to get the work done. Thank you.
We actually have Mr. Mark Schilling here, so would he like to come up now and do your presentation? Thank you, Mr. Schilling.
Good evening, councillors and staff and members of the public here in the gallery and wherever else you're online with. Just like to mention that I'm the Deputy Chair of Kalamunda Environmental Advisory Committee. The Chair would have been here tonight, but she is at the moment on a work assignment, but will be available during the ordinary council meeting. I've just been asked to emphasise the fact that the work and the report and the data in the report is based on suitable scientific data. You'll notice that attachment 4, which is the CEAC report, has got over 25 footnotes in it, which are referring to the source of the information in the report. A lot of them are government documents, in particular state government documents, tertiary institution departments or specialists in their field. So it wasn't the issue of climate change and declaration of climate emergency can become quite emotional in debates, but I just wish to emphasise that the working group in CIAC that put the report together, that was endorsed by CIAC unanimously, just want to emphasise that it was focused on the science and the information available generally on the internet and council documents and elsewhere. So that's my main emphasis for this evening, and I'm here to answer any questions if I can, or the director may be better suited. So,
Thank you, Mr. Schilling. Do we have any questions from councillors? Councillor O'Connor.
So my question's of the director. Brett, when you spoke, you said something about we're not just going to declare an emergency. We're going to do something else. We're going to put some teeth behind it. Can you explain that? Because point 5 says exactly that.
Yep. Thank you, Councillor O'Connor, through the chair. If I refer you to items, recommendations 5 and 6, they go together in the report, and attachment 5 to this report. Declaring a climate emergency, yes, we can do that, but the WALGA have provided quite a comprehensive document that actually understands and makes recommendations about doing some commitments in response to that, and that's relatively item 6 of the recommendation is what we do next in that regard.
Councillor Saul.
I'd like to congratulate CIAC for putting this together. 2020 was an incredibly difficult year, dealing from one emergency to another. So I'm just wondering about the appropriateness of, now that we have, in 2020 we didn't have a climate change minister, and now we do. As of 2021, I'm just wondering whether it would be appropriate for us to also endorse that we advise the Minister for Climate Change, Amber Jade Sanderson, of the declaration, whether that would be appropriate.
Fundamentally, the administration have no objection to that action. I don't think it definitely doesn't change the intent of the report in any way, shape or form.
Okay, I just have one question, if I may. At point 4, seek from the CEO a proposed set of actions addressing climate change within the next revision of the corporate business plan. When will that occur?
So we're currently putting the corporate business plan together, or revising it. We do each year to bring it through council in conjunction with the budget. So the budget adoption is the 26th, I think, of 28th of June, and that's when the corporate business plan will come through with the annual budget.
Thank you very much. Any more questions? Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you. I'm just trying to find my spot. I'm just wondering why this isn't going to go out for public comment. Just when we look at the Kalamunda Advancing, I think it's called Strategic Community Plan. As far as I'm aware, in the 10, what seemed to be the top 10, climate change didn't get a mention. Environmental initiatives did, but climate change itself didn't. So I'm just wondering how we're measuring community sentiment on this issue if we don't go out to the community.
Through the chair, that really is something I believe that council considers. If you want us to go out and consult on this matter, then we would accept that direction and we would do that.
Through the chair, I might add that the genesis of this whole report came from the annual electors meeting and a motion from the floor, so the community have advised us they wish this undertaken.
Councillor Saul?
I would like to formally raise concerns about us going to community on scientific matters. I think it's appropriate in this particular situation that we consult and use the evidence and the science, not based on people's opinions.
Any more questions? Councillor
Thank you. Yes, you've been pushing me to it. Just in consideration, and I think this is important that we start to get our teeth into this one quite thoroughly. We have, I believe, as a council, we have been starting to do a lot and introduced a lot of initiatives to start to address the issues of climate change before we start giving it a label or the so-called teeth. And I was just wondering, is there time, or would it be better at a later date, that we start putting together the initiatives that we've been doing as a council, from solar to tree planting to any other actions that we've been doing that are starting to address this and the potential areas that we can go into the future. You've talked about the teeth, that's the future ones, but we already have been doing things which sometimes don't get any recognition, and I know that things that happen in our area, people don't know about it, but it's happening because we don't tell them or we forget to tell them. So I'm just wondering if there's anything in those grounds that we can do to start showing that we are doing it, and then maybe that will then help people to come up with alternative and extra recommendations how we can improve it or build on it.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, councillor. Just thinking on my feet here, which I'm not, we could potentially provide a further attachment to this report, just setting out some of the initiatives that are currently in train or on or underway or have been completed in recent times that do have climate change combat credentials. And I could just amend the report to refer to that further attachment. That shouldn't be too hard to knock out if that's what councils are after in that regard.
Through the chair, Director, when we look at the WELGA documentation, that to me, I assume is an action, will have action planning in those templates, which would then pull together the things that we need to do in the future, the things we have currently in train, and the things that we are doing in the past and continue. So I assume that would bring that piece of work that will be done over the next 12 months will encapsulate everything that
Thank you.
Climate change as well. But could we ensure that within those actions there is publicity, communications, those types of strategy actions?
Thank you, CEO. Through the chair, yes, that's correct. If we refer to attachment 1 of the declaration that is being recommended, it does require that the city prepares a climate change action plan, which is in sense bringing together all our strategies into one coherent document, so it's quite easy to requirement to prepare that. Excuse me.
Councillor Saul.
Just expanding on that question, so would that look at just emissions, or would that look at carbon store in terms of the role and function of vegetation in assisting with addressing emissions?
Through the chair, at this point in time, I haven't limited myself to what the plan's going to contain.
Any more questions? Mr. Forrest?
I'd like to make through you, Chair, a point with regard to getting the community knowledgeable of this. Give you an example. If you travel along from Midland, along the valley, you will find that the temperature is about 3 degrees higher there than it is up in the hills. So there are specific differences between what Walga would produce in the generality and what Kalamunda has in terms of its area. There are lots of different variations of temperature right across the city.
Councillor Saul.
So when we talk about addressing climate change, we're not talking about addressing the climate within the city of Kalamunda, we're addressing climate change more broadly.
Any more questions?
Madam Chair, I'd just like to flag that I'll bring I'll probably an alternate or make an amendment to the motion that we go out for a standard public consultation, which I think would delay it by about 30 days or 60 days. Not a workshops and presentations, just a standard. Okay.
Managers there, I'm sure she could outline what it takes to go out for comment on a document and to bring it back.
Hi everyone. Yeah, so it does obviously depend on what parameters are placed. Generally speaking, we look at a minimum of a 21-day consultation period, and then we work really hard to try and also make sure that we get a valid sample size, so enough responses to actually provide comment. From there, though, there is the need to actually analyse those results to work through with the department. So there's some more internal work outside of the formal public consultation period, I suppose, where we're actually then reviewing documentation and the like, and then there's the need to get it back up into the council reporting. So it can take a couple of months. Councillor Saul?
I just wanted to confirm that there was a petition, was there not, CEO, which was submitted to support the request for a referral to CIAC to declare a climate emergency?
I can't quite recall whether it was a petition or it was a petition.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, at the annual electors meeting there was a petition put forward, so it was tabled, duly received and tabled. That process then requires the administration to prepare a report in response to the petition. That report in March 2020 recommended that it be that triggered the CIAC action, the working group. So it was the CIAC action was in response to the council adoption of the recommendation from the administration in response to the electors meeting petition, if that makes sense.
Councillor Ritchie.
Thanks. Just have a question of the Director. My memory may well be faulty, but I had an idea there were about 600 signatures on that petition. I may well be wrong. I'm just wondering if I could get a question on notice to say how many that was, because I'm just wondering in terms of even if we did send it out for public consultation, how often do we get anywhere near 600? But my memory is it was about that, but I may well be wrong.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. I will provide feedback on that during this next week.
Councillor Saul.
Yes, so I think it would be useful for councillors to have the full background before we make a decision as to whether we're going out to community consultation. So as Councillor Ritchie has indicated, the petition, the wording of the petition and the history in terms of the request from the AGM, from the community.
Any further questions? Okay. We are moving on now to item 10.4.1, adoption of Kalamunda Advancing Strategic Community Plan 2031, presented by Nicole O'Neill, Manager Customer and Public Relations.
Thank you very much through the Chair, and thank you to the councillors and also the members of the community here in the gallery. Just to give you a little bit of background, the Strategic Community Plan is the highest level plan that the City of Kalamunda prepares, and I know that I've presented to you now a number of times over the last 12 or 18 months because we have been working on the review and undertaking the consultation throughout 2020. So for some of you, there will be a little bit of repetition in the report because the final report actually compiles all of that data, including interim presentations that you've received to date. We undertook pretty significant community engagement as a part of this project, and that started off with our community scorecard, which was presented in May of 2020. The scorecard's actually sent out to a random sample of community members, so we had 4,000 randomly selected households that was sent the survey, and it asked them to rate what's important to them, what the priorities are, along with how satisfied they are with how we're tracking along all of the areas that we actually currently work in. So it's across the entire city. We actually got 483 responses from the random selection. We do also advertise the scorecard as well, and so other members of the community who aren't randomly selected, because we believe everyone has the opportunity to have a say. So we actually received additional responses, and that brought the number of responses of that particular survey up to 554. Additionally, in August 2020, we actually launched an awareness campaign to ensure the community were aware that we were undertaking the review, and also to share some of the highlights over the last 4 years. And then we entered a formal consultation period that actually assisted to help us to build the plan. So we didn't actually develop the plan and then just put it out to consult to start with. We actually worked with the community to review what we currently had and to come up with the draft that came to council for endorsement a couple of months ago. So that consultation ran from the 1st of September 2020 through to the 31st of October 2020. It included hard copy surveys, online engagement, 2 face-to-face workshops, and also earlier in 2020, as a result of COVID, we had commenced online workshops. We actually got quite a lot of positive feedback that for some people who couldn't make a face-to-face workshop, they liked the option to be able to dial in, and so we kept that going. Even though we weren't in COVID restrictions at that time, we still also had an additional online workshop for people who would prefer that. And from that, we received, so we had about 36 participants at the first workshop, we had about 25 at the second, and we had about 5 active voices that actually contributed online. So there was some more that were there, but they weren't necessarily actively contributing. We also received 338 submissions, so surveys, as a part of that particular process. So there was more than 1,000 people that commented as we were kind of leading in. From there, we also went out and conducted workshops with all operating City of Kalamunda advisory committees. So we met with all of our advisory committees as a part of the review to see what they thought was going well, where they thought further work needed to be done. As you're aware, we then put the draft to council, and from that point, we've done an additional piece of advertising just to put the report back out to the community to say, okay, this is everything that you told us, let us know what you think. So we had an extra 154 downloads of the plan, we had 23 surveys returned, we had 9 submissions that were received, we had 16 social media posts, which resulted in more than 6,585 impressions, and we also sent 3,753 emails out to people to let them know. We held a pop-up at Kalamunda Central and also at Hawaiians in Forestfield, and we had information available at all of our locations. So that's just an example up on the screen in terms of some of the collateral that we had out and about in the community. We really worked hard to ensure that members of the community were aware, because that's the first step in getting anyone to actually make comment, is to ensure that they're aware that it's out there, and also to provide as many possible means as we could, because we do understand everyone's busy, there's lots happening, so we were looking to really work as hard as we could to get commentary. So that's just showing you on the screen some of those initial survey demographics. So in terms of representation, there was good representation from male, female. There was also good representation across the suburbs within the district. Interestingly, we ran a little bit of a balance the budget activity, which caused quite a lot of discussion and debate actually in the workshops and at the tables. It was a real highlight of the exercise in terms of where did people think their money should be spent if they had to do the budget. And I can see some smiles around the room because I know you guys have to do the budget at the moment and it's not an easy job. But it was a really interesting result, and I've just popped some of those results up there. Obviously, you've got the community engagement report as well. The one thing that I would stress as a part of the review, and one of the key pieces of feedback that came back, there was a lot of positivity in the final stage of advertising within the survey submissions and the like. You know, some of the comments, and on page 6 we included just a couple of the examples. You know, it seems to be well thought out. You need to plan, if you don't you fail. They're ambitious goals, can you deliver? So there was a lot of that kind of positive sentiment. There was, though, also a significant amount of concern around the environment. And I think that's quite interesting because obviously even tonight here we've had a number of report items that specifically relate to the environment. So of the 9 very considered submissions that we received, and I've included them in full in the community engagement report, almost all of them touched on the environment in one way or another. A number of them specifically raised concerns around potential development of semi-rural land, which will be something that, again, you guys are quite aware of some of the community concern, particularly in the area known as Wattle Grove South. But in general, the need for, and we've made a quote there from the community feedback examples, a bigger focus on environmental protection for trees and wildlife and tree protection, limit small blocks on existing blocks, a requirement to be a more modern shire, be innovative, and not to do what's done before, to have more open spaces. I would like to see Forestfield keep more green spaces and less sold off for development. So those kinds of feelings in the community, they used the strategic community plan as an opportunity to ensure that the city and council were aware of their feelings in that regard. And we have looked to ensure that whilst the strategic community plan is very high level, that we've strengthened that area. So under priority 2, Kalamunda Clean and Green, there have been a number of changes predominantly to wording because the strategies actually listed the strategies prior. So we've made it quite clear that it is about implementation of the local environment strategy, development and implementation of the urban forest strategy, development and implementation of the local biodiversity strategy, and implementation of the environmental land use planning strategy. And we have had a look across those documents. Whilst they look like they're 4 strategies with some success measures, they actually represent more than 140 actions currently. So I just wanted to flag that because that was one of the most significant areas of concern, particularly within the submissions, was that the plan isn't green enough to coin a term, and so I just wanted to ensure that there was a level of awareness that whilst you might read those and think, well, they're only doing a couple of things and the environment is so important, that actually they do represent a significant number of actions that sit within those strategies underneath. So it's about the hierarchy of where the strategic community plan sits in comparison to the other plans that sit underneath. So our recommendation is that Council thank the community for their contribution to the Kalamunda Advancing Strategic Community Plan 2031. It's been a very intensive community engagement process, and we've been very thankful to see community so actively participate along the way at all of those various things, that you note the community engagement report and that we adopt Kalamunda Advancing Strategic Community Plan 2031. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Before we do questions, Nick, can I ask Mrs. Dornan if you'd like to come and do your presentation?
Bev Dornan, 28 Easterbrook Place, Wattle Grove. Good evening, councillors and city staff. When the Strategic Community Plan was advertised for public consultation, it was published with the exhortation that the plan is ready, which was then also reinforced by the statement that what was published was the final document. I note from the agenda paper tonight that some changes have since been made to what was originally published, which I anticipated, along with most people, that would be the case. As councillors would be aware, it is established good practice amongst government entities that when changes have been made to significant documents, that the revised version be accompanied by a document listing the changes that have been made, specifying both wording additions and deletions and accompanied by page and paragraph references. Given the voluminous nature of paperwork associated with the next council meeting, I think it would greatly assist councillors to receive a list of modifications to assist them with their continuing deliberations on this plan. I also think that courtesy requires that this list of revised modifications be published on the website as an attachment prior to the next council meeting for any interested members of the public to also consider. So my question of Nicole is whether a list of final modifications to the plan can be prepared to accompany this agenda item prior to the upcoming council meeting to help focus our deliberations on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much through the chair, and thank you very much, Mrs. Dornan. We would be very happy to do that.
So is there any questions from councillors? Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nicole, was there any group or community of interest disproportionately represented during the engagement process?
As I've said, we went out to all of the advisory committees, so there's 162 participants there. Each of those tends to have a specific area of interest. If you have a specific set of data that you're looking at that you'd like me to comment on, I'm happy to, but more broadly, the marketer data obviously goes out to 4,000 via random sample with more than 500 responses. So generally speaking, I would like to feel that it has been a very good cross-section of community.
Great. So just to follow up, so one thing that caught my eye was in phase one we had 96 respondents under 16.
Correct.
And that formed a fairly big chunk of the respondents. So
so that would be about 33%, right? If you've got more than 338 survey responses. So I don't know that I would call that a chunk. It is 33%. Yep, so that's about a third. That's correct.
Under 16?
Correct.
Yeah.
So that's engagement with young people in the community.
Well, I understand their age, yes. All right. Okay. Thank you for your response.
No problem at all.
Any further questions? Councillor Saul.
Do we know the percentage of people under the age of 18 within the city of Kalamunda?
I'm happy to take that on notice, but I know that two of our growth areas are actually under 18s and also those above 60. So we have good proportions of young people and families along with good proportions of seniors.
Just follow-up question. So a third then would be representative of the community then?
I would need to keep in mind that a third of that particular survey is not a third of the total number of submissions because you're actually looking at more than 1,200. So if you're looking at your 90, so if we were to look at the percentage of young people overall, then you're actually talking about 96 out of about 1,100 or 1,200 responses. So that would be the total percentage. I'm more than happy to confirm whether that's representative of the numbers under 18 for you.
Any further questions? Councillor O'Connor.
Just following up from that, so I'm not questioning the validity of the data. I'm just interested in why under 16s had 96 responses and 16 to 25 had 6. So it's just more a matter of interest. Why does the officer think that result panned out the way it did?
Thank you very much. I would suggest that it is as a result of the work that we did with schools.
Follow-up question, please. In the report at point 17, there is a list of 10 common themes. Is this list ordered in any particular way?
No.
Any further questions? Okay, we will move on. Item 10.4.2, Cali Cash project update. Nicole.
Thank you very much. So I'm sure many of you may have heard of Cali Cash, but if you haven't, then you're going to find out all about it tonight. I've left a copy of this on your tables as well, and for members of the community, this is everywhere that you can buy Cali Cash and the businesses that are currently participating. So as a way of background, in late 2020 and as a part of the response to the COVID-19 pandemic, we formed a partnership with the Community Bank Forestfield and High Wycombe to establish a local gift card program. We've been doing a lot of work with small businesses who were talking to us about how they were really struggling, particularly in the early part of 2020 when we had quite significant lockdowns and restrictions and the like as a result of COVID. And so the partnership was open to all businesses within the city of Kalamunda, and they were able to participate at no cost through the partnership. So there was no cost to be a member, or there was no cost to be involved. That's a copy of what the gift cards actually look like up on your screen there. So what is Cali Cash? It's ultimately a local initiative that actually allows people to buy a gift card that can be used in local stores. So you have what we call load-up stores, and a number of the local news agencies throughout the district are load-up stores. You can go in there, you can put your money onto a Cali Cash gift card just like you would if you were buying any other gift card. But I would note that a lot of gift cards that exist don't actually mean that money is spent locally. They tend to be quite large multi kind of conglomerate type companies in which the money is actually leaving the district. So it does work on an FPOS terminal, meaning it's really easy. It also means for our small businesses, they get their money straight away. So there's no need for them to kind of then go and redeem anything, which some of the buy local campaigns actually have that type of impact for people. So we did a lot of research to actually see what might work best in this community. The gift cards were established by a couple of schoolmates some years ago, and the parent company is called Why Leave Town. It's now operating in more than 50 different communities across 130 postcodes, and we're the first ones in WA that are a part of Why Leave Town and have put together the Cali Cash gift card. So it really does promote and showcase the wide variety of local businesses that we have here in the city of Kalamunda. It encourages people to shop and also to support local, and it's been a fantastic partnership between the Community Bank and the city of Kalamunda. We have undertaken the program in a series of stages. So throughout early 2020, we did a lot of research and review to make sure that it was going to work, that all the legalities were good. We then needed to go out and talk to businesses because we had to make sure that it was something that they thought would work and that they actually wanted to do. So our whole part of stage one was actually focused on getting businesses on board, and the City of Kalamunda's economic development team, our customer and PR team, and the bank were out actively chatting to businesses in relation to that. We got a lot of business community interest in the program, and they all started to sign up, and so then we knew obviously that we were on to something that was quite good. We then moved into stage 3, which was to advise the community that this was now available to them and it was something that they could utilise. And stage 4 is where we're at now, so it's about building the program's sustainability and ensuring that it continues to build momentum. So in terms of our targets, we set ourselves some pretty ambitious targets. Why Leave Town said, it usually takes a couple of years to get this really embedded in a community, but we said that in the first 6 months we wanted to have 50 businesses registered. We actually got 78 businesses registered, and that was in the first 5 months. And we said that we wanted to sell 100 cards or get to a value of $4,000, because people can put however much they would like on the gift cards, like depending on what suits them. So we wanted 100 cards or a value of $4,000 in the first 6 months, and in the first 5 months we actually had more than 200 cards purchased, and we've had more than $15,000 loaded locally and spent locally in the community. And so we want to say thank you again, second time, to your reports. But ultimately, the recommendation is to note the report and the results of the Calor gift card program to date.
Councillor Ritchie.
I would just like to congratulate both the city and the Bendigo Bank, or the Community Bank, for this initiative. I think it's absolutely outstanding. I purchased some for Christmas gifts, and I was very pleased to get some back for Christmas gifts last year. But I would like to really congratulate the city. I think it's a terrific initiative. My only concern is there does seem to be still a lack of knowledge amongst some businesses. I go to a lot of coffee shops, often on a coffee crawl basis across the city with a friend. I think we've up to about 19 we've been to. And only about 2 or 3 had actually heard of it. Now, that's no one's fault necessarily, but I wonder whether we might do a bit more of a push with some of the businesses, particularly those that have got high turnovers, like coffee shops and so on, where people are there a lot, and that would then, that would endorse with the businesses, particularly as they're not businesses that have a lot of money necessarily, but there's no cost for them. But I was a little bit disappointed as to how many of them knew very little about it, but that's just a negative from my point of view. However, I just wanted to say congratulations. I think it's a great initiative. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to respond to that, I guess it is always really difficult to get everyone. So we've literally walked the streets, like actually walked up and down the streets talking to business owners. But we would be very, very happy to give you a stack of brochures as well, so that if you're going into any of your coffee shops, you can help us.
Any further questions? Can I just ask quickly, Nick, where are the businesses mainly based? Are they is it like all throughout the city, or mainly?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have put the list to redeem. Given that we're live broadcasting, I don't really want to give like one benefit over another, and I don't know if you want me to read all 78 out, but I can promise you that we do have businesses all over the district.
Okay, so now we're moving on to item 10.4.3, Corporate Business Plan Quarterly Update, January to March 2021. Presentation by Gary Ticehurst, Director, Corporate Services.
Thanks, Nick. Good evening, councillors, staff and members of the community. The purpose of this report is to provide council with a progress report on the corporate business plan actions for the quarter covering the January to March 2021 period. The corporate business plan is endorsed by council at the 30th of June each year, and during that year quarterly review process takes place, reporting progress against key deliverables, noting that those deliverables are linked to major plans and strategies. And I should note that the corporate business plan contains a total of 119 different actions. So in closing, it is recommended that council note the report for the Kalamunda Achieving Corporate Business Plan for the period ending 31st of March 2021. Thank you.
Any questions? Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to know if is there a list, or is there a way of knowing which actions are not expected to be delivered before the end of this financial year?
Through the chair, yes. Each action in the report has a commentary against it. But we could go through and synthesise if there are ones that sit within that report that are unlikely to be completed. But it is identifiable from within the report. But from my memory, there aren't too many.
Okay, so if I go through the report, I'll see if an action, for whatever reason, isn't able to be delivered before the end of this year, it'll be written there?
If it's not going to be delivered, it will generally be written in there, noting that we're sitting at third quarter, okay? So the information contained in progress reporting is where we are now. It's not inconceivable that some projects in the last quarter could fall into the category of needing to be carried over for the subsequent year. But I'd emphasise again that they are under pretty close scrutiny, and we do review them.
Any further questions? Okay. So we can close the meeting. It is now almost after the meeting, yeah. Okay, so we'll now close the meeting. So thank you to the public for your attendance and councillors for all those questions. Thank you.
I'll turn the...
Very nervous. Wasn't your problem. Right.
Yeah. Just a second.